Here's today's project. Retina 2, type 014, which you can tell from the type 011 because the 014 has a film reminder dial here underneath the rewind knob. So, problems with this particular camera. Let's have a look. Well, the front won't open or close, and you might be able to see why there. Something has gone very askew with the struts. Let's see if we can encourage this open a bit. This arm at the bottom is hooked behind the standard. The arm here is hooked behind the standard instead of in the groove, in the slot. See if I can pull that forward. There you go. It opens and closes now. The focus is quite stiff. Certainly needs to be cleaned and lubricated. Let's find out if the shutter actually works. We'll set it to a suitable speed. Oh, that ring's a bit tight. Let's give it a 25th, see if anything happens. The shutter is cocked. I'll just release it from the arm on the shutter itself. That fires, so the shutter certainly works. The slow speeds may or may not be good. Let's find out. We'll try it on a half a second. Oh, that seems positive enough. So we know that the shutter functions. The focus is very dry and doesn't feel good at all. We'll see if the Film Advance Interlock appears to work. So I'll just roll the sprocket wheel slowly with my thumb while I turn the Film Advance until it locks, and that allows me to press the shutter release. Now you'll see the shutter release button is exceptionally reluctant to come back up. Now that would certainly cause a problem. So we've got problems there with the shutter release not working correctly. It's very stiff in its action, just doesn't want to return to the rest position. Film Advance otherwise appears to function. Focus is certainly in dire need of being stripped and cleaned. Shutter does function but could probably do with a service. The lens looks pretty hazy. It might be just filth on the front of the front element. I suspect it's internal on that front element. I'll have a quick look in the back, see what the rear group looks like. Yep, if I return that to infinity position, that certainly folds correctly. Now there is a line visible across this rear element here. It appears to be internal. Looks like a hair or something. Probably isn't a hair. It's probably a mark of some description. And there's certainly another big smudge on the inside there of some sort of haze. Quite a pronounced cloudiness there. So I better strip this camera down and service it. Hopefully the lens will clean up and get it back to its owner, who doubtless is very enthusiastic to see it again. It always seems to take an age to get them home again. Well, let's see if I can fight my way in. Put something through the fork and rotate the rewind knob, and that came off easily enough. It's certainly a funny colour. It's like oil stained or something there. It's a bit unusual. The advance knob, well, the advance knob of course is left hand threaded. There are flats on the advance shaft just above the take up spool. And that is not coming off. So I'll have to use cunning techniques to get that off, which I'll show you shortly. I'll get this shutter release button off, and I'll just use my pliers there that I use for doing rewind knobs on other models. Right, I need a tool to see the back of that knob. That's going to be difficult, I can just tell. Well, I spent a lot of fruitless time looking for the thing I was looking for, but this clamp has done the job for me today. Now originally this was much bigger and it was designed, it's a very handy thing for getting filters off, but it broke years ago, so it's somewhat foreshortened. But it still does a marvellous job of getting knobs like that loose when I need to. Of course that's left hand threaded. I probably should have mentioned that. So 2 screws here, one on each end of the top housing. Now to get the top housing off, first you want the shutter cocked. You want the film advanced until it locks. Hold down the shutter release as far as it will go. That'll allow you to lift the top cover back and over it, because you've got to unhook it from the rewind lever here and the frame counter adjustment wheel there. So that's the top off. I can have a look inside here. Bit dusty and dirty, nothing horrendous. See if I can get these 2 screws loose that hold the rangefinder to the camera chassis. That one does not want to move. It's interesting. Let's try a bigger screwdriver. That's it. The rangefinder in this model is very much the same as the rangefinder in the Retina IIA cameras. Some of the early examples show slight differences of construction, but the same basic principle, same basic shape. I'll take off the frame counter dial. This is all very dusty and dirty under here, as you can probably see. Ideally I want that collar off there now, and it may or may not come off easily. Again, I've got to put my spanner on the flats on the shaft to stop the shaft from turning, and we'll see if that collar is loose or not. No, it's not. I'll find another pair of pliers. Right, let's see how I get on. That's all that was required. It wasn't very tight at all. Spin that off. That's left hand threaded, of course, just like the advance knob was. There's our advance rewind lever. That can come off. If I pull back this arm, I can lift the shutter release shaft off. Here's the lever for the wheel that allows us to set the frame counter. I'm just going to unhook the spring from that, let that escape under there. And I should be able to lift the spring off. That screw there is the pivot post for that wheel. There it is. That little shield can come off. That wheel can come off. Now here, even get that loose. Watch closely the position of your levers and your various washers. I'll take out the stud, lift off this lever, lift off this lever, then there's a large diameter washer, then there's this lever, then there's a washer with a small hole in the centre of it there. Now there's two wheels here, two ratchet wheels. The teeth on them point in opposite directions. These are riveted together, so they come off as a pair. We've got two springs here and here. They look almost the same, they're not the same. Take great note of what shape they are. In an ideal world, use your digital camera, take photos of all of these things as you take them apart. Every time you lift something off, take another photo so you've got a record of what's underneath. And that way, you've got something to check when you go to put it back together, and it won't just be a mystery. There's nothing more frustrating than getting to the end of a job and discovering you've got one component left over and you don't know where it came from. Alright, let's just get this rewind apart. Just lift that clip slightly, that's enough, slide that out. Now the rewind here, that's two pieces, that's got a screw that holds it together. And I'll remove that screw. Take great note of the shape of that screw because there's not another one like it in the camera. If you lose it, it's going to cause you grief. There. That will come apart, all those pieces can be cleaned. Back to the body. 3 screws hold the bush here on the top of the film advance. There's the shaft and the bush. There's not much to that and there's not much to go wrong. As long as it's clean, it'll be good. Here's our take-up spool. And that looks suspiciously to me like that's come from a different model. I might be wrong. I know the early models used a Bakelite take-up spool, and that looks exactly like what I'd expect to see on a 2A or similar. However, we'll check that. As long as it works, that's the main thing. At the base of the camera, well, I want to get the door off. So there's a pivot pin under here. So I want to peel this leather back because I also need to get to the screw that holds the struts mechanism into the camera, which is particularly important in this case because the struts are probably a little bit suspect on account of they'd been abused. Right, so the leather on the base. That leather, the adhesive is breaking away comparatively easily. I'll just take these 3 screws out here. This holds the tripod socket to the base of the camera. Now you don't necessarily need to take this off the camera, but you should check to make sure that the screws are done up tight, because if the screws are not tight, when you put it on a tripod and do up the screw, it will not be rigid, which of course then encourages people to tighten up the tripod screw a bit more, and it's still not rigid, and then people can sometimes just keep doing up the screw on the tripod till they tear the entire socket off the base of the camera. That sort of thing is unfortunately not uncommon. So if the tripod doesn't appear to be tightening up, there's probably a reason for it. And continuing to screw things up will screw things up. With leather like this, I only need to get back as far as the screw at this point, but if I can peel the leather back to this point here, when I glue it back, it'll be fairly invisible. If you stop at the point, say in the middle here, just fold it back enough to get there, you'll find that when you glue it back, you'll almost inevitably end up with a telltale line across there, where the gluing is slightly different, and it's obvious that someone has had the leather off. If you push that line back to somewhere around here, you'll find that it's invisible. No one will know. That is probably far enough for my purposes. Right, under here, there's our screw for the front door hinge. Get that off. Of course, there's a matching one at the top. Swing that door forward. There's a spacer washer there on the top of that door. Sometimes there's more than one. There is in this case, there were two. Sometimes there's one at the bottom and the top of the door. I just stretch that door to get it off. Now there's two cartridge paper washers here, which provide some, I suppose, controlled friction at those 2 points. Try not to lose those, and if you do lose them, you can create new ones out of some cartridge paper. They're just a bit of a bugger to cut out and make washers, that's all. But it's not technically difficult, it's just time consuming, and it's hard to make them without them looking ugly. I need to get that shutter out next. The shutter assembly. Well, I've got my tool here, my spanner. This was a Belgian spanner, of course they're no longer made. You might find one on the second-hand market. Particularly good for the Retina 1A, 2As and earlier models like this. Right, that's our shutter and lens assembly off the camera. I'll just pop that ring on there so I don't lose it. That shutter, I always do the shutters separately to the body. Here, this is our focus scale and so forth. So let's take off this ring at the front. This ring at the front is hooked up to the arm, and the arm comes through here into that little stud, and that little stud pulls the rangefinder forward. It screws unusually tight. Right, so we've got our focus scale ring here, the outside part, the chrome part, the outer helical, this bright brass piece, and then this dull piece here, that's the inner helical. I need to mark the position of the focus scale ring and the outer helical so I know where it's to go back. So I usually scribe some lines across that where I can find my marks later. And I normally scribe 2 lines at the bottom, one line at the top, and then I know which way up it goes as well as how it's aligned. Now I'm going to take the take these screws out. That'll enable me to take the focus scale ring off the outer helical. Alright, I need to mark my inner helical and the outer helical together so I know where they are to be reassembled. So I'll normally just swing that round until the surfaces are dead level. There, the inner helical is slightly higher than the outer helical. It might be as low as I'm going to get it. It means that the inner helical is retracted all the way. And what I'll do now is I will just continue my scribe lines that I'd put there earlier through to the inner helical. And you're marking that so that when you go to reassemble things, you know that you have the inner and outer reassembled correctly. Because it's a multi-start thread. If you start the thread in a different position, then the inner and outer helical will be in a different, basically the inner helical will be further out or closer in to the film plane than where you started, which would mean that your focus will all be wrong. Right, off with that, off with the... Now this is very, very stiff. You already knew that, that's dried grease doing that. That all needs to be cleaned. Right, here, the focus mount here is held with 4 screws to the front standard, and these 4 black screws here hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. Well, actually they hold them to the back of the focus mount. So I'll drop those off, the bellows drop back into the body. These 4 screws here, they're loose. Very loose in the case of that one. There's our focus mount here, and that nice neat brown finish in there is hardened, dried out grease, and that'll all have to be scraped away and get this back to clean. Yeah, it's fairly brittle. It's like a hard wax. To get the struts out of the body, 1 screw here at the top, that's that tall post. We screw at the base of the body in the same relative position, right there. It's just sitting under that pile of adhesive. See if that wants to come loose. Yeah, it does. And 2 last screws. I'll just close those bellows up because I'm probably going to have to fight with these ones. There's 2 here in the film cassette chamber, and typically they do not want to come loose without a fight. Right, this is where you get out the big tools, and I'll just take this away, give it a good thump and get those screws loose. 1, 2. So just a quick tap with some tension on your driver. Just acts like an impact driver. Loosens those screws up without the screwdriver slipping or making a mess. we can take the struts out of the body. There's one return spring in here for the shutter release. Put that to one side so I don't lose it. Here are the struts, and the body is pretty much down as far as it needs to go. Very rarely would I need to take out the sprocket shaft. If there was corrosion or a lot of sand in there, I would. And how you'd go about doing that in this case is there's a small screw here and here that lock this roller and this sprocket to the shaft. You undo those screws, you can slide the whole shaft out through the top with its gear, clean everything and put it back when you're done. I don't think I'll need to. Here's the body to one side. Let's have a quick look at these struts. So what I'm looking for here is to see if they're damaged, if they're bent in any fashion. We already know that somebody had managed to get the front door disengaged from the struts before the camera arrived here. There's various ways you can achieve that. Somebody may not have known that you needed to push in the release buttons in order to fold the front of the camera, and they just ham-fistedly gave the door an extra hard push. The camera might have been dropped. If the camera's been dropped with the door in the normal open position, typically this would hit the floor and the force might pop one of these pins out of the track, so it might have happened that way. Or somebody may have had a new and more interesting and special way to bugger things up, and we'll never know about it. But whatever the case was, they haven't done any terrible or lasting damage. And I'm looking at the state of these struts, they look pretty good to me. There's a slight bend here, which I'll straighten up. These struts, the inner struts should be pretty much flat. They should be in a straight line on both sides. The outer struts should be somewhat dished so that they're further apart at their ends than they are in the middle, and all you need to do is do that with your fingers. Just place your thumbs in the middle, give it a bit of a tweak, and just put a little bit of a dish into it. And that ensures that when this is all in the body, there is outward pressure on these 2 points here, which helps them lock into position in the open position. And it just means that it's positive, that everything locks into position positively. This is all quite good. It's a bit dusty and dirty. There's a bit of dried grease, a little bit of grit and rubbish. Nothing particularly untoward. Here's the shutter release components. This is a bit sticky. I want to clean all this with solvent so that that runs smoothly, because at the moment it doesn't run smoothly. It's sticky with dried grease. So I'll clean all that and lubricate that with a bit of molybdenum paste when I'm done. But all that looks good. There's nothing awful there. It's always good when you don't find terrible things. Right, this top cover here, this film reminder dial at the top here, that's often very stiff and reluctant to move. It's also hard to get that big screw undone. Sometimes I'll just use the end of my rule. That'll work quite nicely in those slots. Sometimes even that doesn't want to work and I've got to look around for something a bit bigger. We'll see how I get on when I get to that stage. But for the moment, I'll start by cleaning the body. There's not an awful lot to note with this because there's not an awful lot to go wrong. All I need to do is get rid of all the grease and dirt and dust. Check that the pressure plate here is clean, it doesn't have any lumps on it. I can see there's like a little hollow in this corner and that corner, and that's where it's worn over time, I would say. I don't know that the back's been pushed in. Sometimes the back's been pushed in. I can feel a bit of hollow to that. And it means that someone's given the camera, perhaps when using it, they've stuck their thumbs in the back and given it a good squeeze. This is only aluminium, it's relatively soft. You can make a mess of it. The pressure plate on these models, I don't think you can get them off easily. Oh yeah, there is a technique. Got to get that off over that rivet. I wonder if I can achieve that. Yes. Yeah, it's like keyholes. And they pull down over those slots there. Now you can see here. You can see how that catches the light. This back door's been pushed in. Now that back door being pushed in, that's what's caused the pressure plate here and here to be driven into the film rails at the back here. So I'll just pop that thing back into shape, and I should be able to do it just by pressing it with my thumb. You can still see a bit of a mark there, but it's nothing like as dished in as it was, and I can check that with a rule across the back there to see how flat it looks. That looks pretty good to me. So that sorts out that little issue. Otherwise that all looks good. Now I've just got to get all the dust and dirt out of this, which is exceptionally boring and mostly involves using a dry paintbrush to shift the dust, the loose dust. When all the loose dust is out of the way, then I'll just use a bit of Naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid on a cotton bud, and give everything a good wipe. We know that this camera has been sitting for some length of time with the front door jammed half open, so it's probably accumulated a bit of dust. Don't know whether it's been sitting in someone's cupboard or it's been sitting in a display case, or God forbid on an open shelf somewhere. It doesn't look that dusty. Zeiss bumps. I'm looking now to see if there are any Zeiss bumps that I should deal with. There's only one prominent Zeiss bump here, it's right there. It depends how easily the leather is going to peel off the back of the camera. Obviously I've got to peel from somewhere to somewhere. Typically I would start down here, peel the leather back this way. There's a Zeiss bump there too. Depends how brittle the leather is and how well it's stuck. It looks pretty well stuck to me. There's another technique to get to a Zeiss bump like that in the middle, and that basically is just peel the leather up at this point and scrape out underneath there. I don't want to take the leather completely off the camera back because I might tear it. Okay, I've got that as far as that Zeiss bump. Now, with the tip of my tweezers, let's see if I can scrape that crap out. That's it there, that green stuff. and it's just like a green wax that forms there. And I'm just checking to see if that bump feels like it'll sit down flat. That seems good. Little shred of leather there rolled up. I'll see if I can get that to sit down. That seems quite good. I'll take a toothpick pour a bit of naphtha on it, just run it under there. Use that to fish out any dust and rubbish. Now leather just torn there. That's on the lettering of the made in Germany. Alright, that looks fine. I'm just going to glue that back down now. And to do that, I just want a bit of adhesive, and I'll put that on a piece of paper. And then I'll transfer that in underneath the leather on a toothpick. Well, that'll probably do. Push that down into place. I'll just take a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud and wipe up the excess on that edge of the door. Try not to get it running down into the groove. That looks good. Right, that's dealt to our Zeiss bump, and I haven't had to peel the leather off the entire door. Now this is all a bit grey and tired looking, the leather on the back of this door. Now it did come to me with something stuck on the back here with some tape. I don't know how well that's going to lift off. That looks to be okay. It had a note on here stuck on with a bit of sellotape. It's worth noting, never stick anything onto the back of a camera with sellotape, because it's very good at lifting the finish off the leather. You can probably see the mark from that there. I'm going to clean the back of this with a bit of naphtha, because that's adhesive from that tape sitting on there. Want all of that off. Looking at the back of that, I don't know whether that leather's just been scuffed or whether it's had something stuck on there like a label or something at some stage. But I will apply some polish to that and you can see how it looks. Let's come find my polish. Here I've got some renovating polish. It doesn't smell the best, but it does a good job. It's very rich in pigment. Now that looks quite dull at the moment, but I'll let that soak in a bit, and then give it a brush, and you'll probably find that cleans up quite nicely after that. Certainly a vast improvement over what it was. It was much more like the colour of that door, I suppose. Now it's black and shiny. Alright, I'll show you that when I've given it a brush. Well, there you go. It's nice and black and shiny again now. That looks really good. It's a vast improvement over that tired, greyed out look that it had before. I'll carry on cleaning up this camera body. Nothing much to see here because I'm just going to be wiping the inside of that shell with some naphtha on a cotton bud.